On April 6, 1858, Dakota County established Rosemount as one of its first 17 townships. On May 11, 1858, Rosemount was organized. Before the organization, the county opened to settlement in 1853. Walter and William Strathern made the first Rosemount claim in today's Rich Valley area. In 1854, C.H. Carr opened a public house and stagecoach station nearby on the Mendota-Wabasha Road, now known as Highway 52. In 1854, James Diffley made western Rosemount's first claim. That spring, Andrew Keegan staked a claim on the east shore of today's Keegan Lake. Keegan, a surveyor and being the first postmaster, gave the town its name, Rosemount. From a town in Ireland, his home was used as the post office. He moved into Rosemount Village in 1866. By 1855, a wave of new settlers sought and filed claims, creating homes, farms, and families. Pioneer life wasn't easy, but it offered promise. Here shows the Mallories, Hines, and Farrells, some of the early settlers. One of the settlers in 1855 was Robert P. Morrison. After building a 2-room log cabin, he returned east for his wife, Mary, and 5 children, only to die on his return west. Continuing to Rosemount, Mary farmed the land and took in travelers and hunters, calling her home the Prairie House, which one day's journey from St. Paul on Dodd Road. 2 years later, a large house was built. In 1859, a store and another hotel, Rosemount House, was built, creating the first business district of Rosemount. The Prairie House continued until 1898 and then remained as a private home. In 1995, the house was torn down for redevelopment. To name the town Rosemount or Saratoga, that was one of the discussions at the organizational meeting on April 6, 1858. Andrew Keegan and Hugh Durham, a very prominent farmer, wanted to continue with the name of Rosemount. The Irish won out. In 1864, the Minnesota Central Railway Company changed the business district of Rosemount by building the lines east of the current business district. In 1867, the railroad built the elevator and businesses were popping up all over. In December 1866, the village of Rosemount was platted by James A. Case. The town was growing until it is now a flourishing village. The Act of Incorporation was approved by the legislature in 1875. The Hines Hotel, built in 1874, occupied as a harness and livery stable, then as a saloon. 11 sleeping rooms with no water were on the second floor. In the saloon hung a 6.5-foot Tiffany lamp, supposedly now hanging in Branson, Missouri. On the east side of the building, Esther Martin opened a restaurant, bakery, and ice cream parlor in 1904. In 1922, Al Wiederhold owned the building, opening up Al's Cafe, a gathering place for everyone in town. The East Room was then known as the Dutch Room. Frank and Cecil Ahern purchased the building in 1944 and converted the upstairs, adding indoor plumbing. In 1963, a decision was made to tear down the building because of heavy maintenance and heating costs. Cars started to replace horses and trains in the 1920s, and in 1925, Louis Bernier from Mendota opened a Ford car dealership. Later, he franchised Chevrolets and Buicks. Check out this sales slip from 1941 for prices on extras for your car. Notice he also sold Frigidaire appliances. The building has had many facelifts and is now the McMenemy Building. Shelley and Mobile gas stations were on the site before Shamrock Animal Hospital was built in 1995. St. Joseph's Church was built in town in 1881 after a cyclone had destroyed the first church. The Highland Cemetery on Pilot Knob Road remains near the site of the old church. The building closest in this picture is the St. Joe's Temperance Hall, built in 1876 and then moved in 1910. The building in the middle, built in 1874, was the priest's rectory. The building was moved in April 1905 to the Tracy Farm, just north of town, and turned into a private residence, has since been torn down. The church was then erected in 1881 and then disassembled in 1924 for a larger building. With the move of the Temperance Hall, Father Cosgrove erected a park, calling it Cosgrove Park. In 1905, a second rectory was built and then torn down in 1969. In 1969, a third rectory was built on the church site. A county library will replace the rectory torn down in 2007. A second-story school was built in 1953, with the second floor added in 1957. In 1874, Rosemount Village was an active center for business. Lebanon, now Apple Valley, and Eagan came to Rosemount for many of their needs. The hardware firm of Frederick Cloping and Lewis P. Warwick began business in 1875 after purchasing stock from G. Merle, who had established the business 2 years previous. Cloping took over as postmaster and operated the post office from the store. 1916, Michael Ryan and Michael Corcoran purchased the business. In 1948, Michael Ryan met with tragic death. He was electrocuted while drilling a well at a job site. Michael Corcoran's son, Earl, bought into the business, now known as Corcoran's Hardware. Earl's son, Dick, took over the business, while this block was razed in April 1987. Dick Corcoran moved the line of John Deere implement dealership to a building east of the gas station on 145th Street. All banking business was done at the Garrity store before the State Bank of Rosemount received its charter in October 9, 1909. After the bank building was built to the west, this building was used for small businesses and then razed in April 1987. In 1902, Frank Gollan and Pat Hyland built a new grocery store, and through the years there were many grocery store owners. Ben Moeller was one of the last owners of the building, and Duffy Brothers was the last grocery store to operate at this location. The second floor after 1934 was the second site of the telephone operators known as Telephone Central. This was one of the buildings razed in 1987. In 1959, the First State Bank built their new building, and in 1972 added a drive-through. The independent bank is owned and operated by second and third generations of Toombs. Thomas Corrigan, a local electrician, built this building in 1957 for his business. This site originally was John Farquhar's, then Dennis Hogan's, blacksmith shop. Joe Stelter opened his blacksmith shop in 1897, and when cars became the way of life, he did auto repairs. The building was torn down in 1985 for the current Rosemount Post Office. Heinen Harness Shop, built in 1876, also had a residence adjoining it. This is a view showing Peter Heinen, Sr. and Patrick McCarthy inside the shop. Henry Hagemeister purchased this property in 1904 for $700 and built his home with the meat market attached to it. The home, now belonging to Bill Bartell, was torn down in 1964 and a new post office was built in its place. By 1986, Rosemount had outgrown this post office and moved into a new site to the west. This property has been the home to realty and insurance companies. In 1897, Henry Hagemeister purchased this property and opened a meat market, the first of 3 buildings. This building was used until 1904, when he built his home and business together to the west. This building was moved and added on to his new place of business. In this street scene, you can see the Hagemeister home and business. The white building closest to you on the Ryan block was built in 1904 for George Dorsey's restaurant and Frank Hyland's saloon. This building burnt down in February 1913. After the fire in 1913, Frank Highland built a new saloon on the Ryan Block. During Prohibition, saloons closed. Many were then used as pool halls, a place for the men to gather. John O. Ryan took over the now Mornan Saloon and ran a pool hall. In 1920, Richard Bernier opened a drugstore on an expanding Ryan building, and in the 1930s, Hagemeister Meat Market returned to its original location and added Fairway Foods to the business. Hagemeister Meat Market and Grocery continued until 1964. This picture shows a Memorial Day parade in 1946 at the end of World War II. On an adjoining site in 1920, Farmer State Bank opened for business. On a cold and windy night in January of 1928, a fire broke out in the bank. The winds were so bad, the fire department was heard to say, the whole town almost burnt down. John C. Garrity built this building in 1881, after his first building burnt down. With Dennis Mulrooney as his partner, John F. Garrity and Joseph J. Hines entered into the business with J.C. in 1885, known as Garrity and Company. In 1910, the partnership dissolved and J.F. Garrity was sole owner. The boiler exploded on Christmas Eve 1910, and the front half of the building had to be rebuilt. The second story was used as a dance hall for school graduations, church functions, and then in 1941 converted to office and living quarters. Hubert J. Garrity inherited the building and grocery store, and in 1929 a well-remembered Thune drug store was added. In 1945 the grocery store was sold to Robert and James Duffy. When the Duffy Brothers store moved across the street in 1958, James Ahern opened up a coast-to-coast store. In 1965, Coast to Coast moved to the new Kenrose Shopping Mall. The first building was a small land office built by William Cadzo in 1911. He was a former hotel owner, also county coroner, auctioneer, and real estate businessman. In 1921, this was the home of the Rosemount Record, a local newspaper which published from September 2, 1921 to January 27, 1922. The current building was built in 1928 for the Farmer State Bank, who had lost its first building to a fire. The bank closed its doors in 1930. It opened again as a restaurant, most remembered as the Bon Ton Cafe, last owned by John and Joe Hawkins. Later was used as a variety store, and in the 1970s, it was the Zodiac Room, a massage parlor, until the city closed them down. Dwayne Berg opened his first dental office here. In 1921, Rosemount was selected for filming segments of a Hollywood silent film. The movie was based off of Sinclair Lewis's book, Free Air. 3 locals had parts in the film. They were William Cadzo, who played the part of a sheriff sitting at the intersection of Highway 3 and 145th Street. It also starred Bill Blondo as an auto mechanic and 11-year-old Terrence Hines, son of Michael Hines. The town was named Schoenstrom. James Highland built and opened a saloon in 1906. In 1921, it was sold to William Tibbetts, and he ran a pool hall. It was later the Rose Bowl Cafe, and was then razed in 1964. In 1967, the Montgomery Ward store was built. In 1903, Dennis Gibson, a barber, built this building. His son, Frank, went to work with him after he had served in World War I. Frank continued the barber shop until 1964, when he retired. Gibson sold the building to Walter Stracy, who moved it to his property on the west side of town. This building now stands at Dakota Village at the fairgrounds in Farmington. In the vacant lot behind the barber shop, in the 30s and early 40s, on Saturday evenings, local merchants would put up a large white screen and movies would be shown, Rosemount's own outdoor theater. Downtown Rosemount even had a 1-lane bowling alley, later used as a pool hall. This picture is from 1911, when the alley was used temporarily as a mercantile while the Garrity building was being built after the explosion. The Rosemount House was moved into the village in 1874 from 1/2 mile west. William Cadzo purchased the hotel in 1876 and continued the business. Henry Mongan, who was the manager of the hotel, purchased the building in 1914. He continued to operate it until 1946, when it again sold and was made into apartments. After it was torn down in 1964, the city-owned Shamrock Liquor moved from across the street into its new building. The fire department organized in December 1910 with 10 volunteers. William Cadzo was elected chairman. Next to the fire garage was the jail and the village hall on the upper floor, which was built in 1876. In the 1960s, some of the village hall departments moved to the town hall building on County Road 42, across from Dakota County Technical College. The remaining city departments moved in 1975, and the building was razed. The Rosemount Cooperative Creamery was organized in 1909 and managed by John and Frank Bartell. In 1912, it was converted into a chicken hatchery. Archie Johnson purchased it in the 1950s, added a 2-story building, and it opened as apartments. In 1956, Rosemount Engineering Company had their office here. They designed temperature sensors. One such sensor was the NASA Titan II launch vehicle. This company is now known as Rosemount, Inc., a worldwide company. The building was torn down in 1981. Oil station also owned by John Bartell. It is now Marathon. Jefferson Highway, or Trunk Highway Number 1, now Highway 3, ended at the elevator. The route to travel south to Farmington was on 145th, then south on Chippendale. In 1917, the Good Roads Act put Rosemount on the map. This stretch of highway was to go from Duluth to the Iowa border. Roads continued to improve, and by 1928, main roads were tarred. The elevator was built by the railroad in 1867 and run by horsepower, later steam engines. Purchased by Leo Flegel in 1927, he added a feed mill in 1955. This elevator is the longest operating elevator in the county and is currently run by the 3rd generation of Flegels. On the east side of the elevator, the railroad built a train station. These are pictures of the second station built in 1906, after the first one burnt down. On June 16, 1977, sparks from a passing train started the second depot on fire and burnt it to the ground. The station was never rebuilt due to the declining of passenger trains. Adam Schneider opened a harness shop and in 1915 moved from across the street and opened a shoemaker shop. This is young Kurt Schneider, Adam's son, in the front of the shop. The building eventually was the home of Rosemount Saw and Tool. There was a need to consolidate several single-room schoolhouses in town. So, in 1896, a brick 2-story schoolhouse was built for grades 1 through 8. In the 1920s, Michael Martin bought the building and converted it into living quarters, known as Sunshine Flats. This building was later the home of an office of Dr. Miguel Flores, the town doctor. It was a mortuary before it was torn down in 1972. A new school building was promised in 1918 for grades 1 through 12. Because of World War I, the building was not finished until December 1919. Before 1916, those students who wanted to continue their education had to go to Hastings or St. Paul for high school. Rosemount's first graduates class of 1918 were 4 young women who had to attend classes on the 2nd floor of the Village Hall, a makeshift high school. Rosemount School was one of the first to offer adult education. Located in the 1918 building, it offered sewing and cooking classes to women, the first technical school. The first building for the post office was built in 1903. On the left side of the building housed the first telephone office. It was in 1903 when the telephone poles and lines began to be seen along the roadways. Telephone Central was in this building until the 1930s, when it moved to the Moeller Building. In 1934, the building was torn down, and Jimmy Doyle, later owned by Augie Ratzloff, built a gas station. Augie built a new Phillips 66 station south across the street in 1963. In 1885, St. Croix Lumber opened a lumberyard. Andrew J. Ward, who had a large contracting business, purchased the yard in 1903 and soon called it Rosemount Lumber. In 1917, Ward sold the business to his manager, Thomas Underwood. Lamperts acquired the property in 1938, and in 1967, all but one of the original lumber sheds had moved to other properties on this block, including the office. Original office building temporarily used by the Farmers State Bank after the fire in 1928 is now at Murphy's Landing in Shakopee as a bank. Lampert's remained in Rosemount until 1979 when it moved to Apple Valley. The block was later raised for redevelopment. In January 1910, Joseph J. Hines, who owned the grain elevator, purchased and moved the St. Joseph's Temperance Hall to the center of the village. He used it as a retail shop for selling grain and other farm and garden needs. In 1917, he added to the north side of the building and opened a car garage selling Rio and Case cars and trucks. This building was used as a post office and lastly, a beauty salon and barber shop. It was raised in 1981. Rudy Rutzigel, who sold International Trucks and Chrysler cars, took over the garage section in 1927. In 1962, Wilroy Ford, William and Roy Almquist opened and the dealership. Then in 1981, when the building was raised, they moved east of the gas station on 145th. That building is now Pulfus Implement. In 1987, Wilroy's dealership moved to Apple Valley. It is now Apple Valley Ford. Andrew and Bridget Keegan built the first house in the village in 1866. After a fire in 1881 that destroyed the house, a saloon was built, later owned by Joe Lynch. In 1914, Lynch tore the old wood building down and replaced it with a brick building. It was told that on the eve of Prohibition in 1920, Lynch closed the saloon at midnight to all but his regular customers. At 7 a.m. the next morning, he pulled a revolver out from under the bar and shot into the air, leaving a bullet hole in the tin ceiling, signaling it was time to stop drinking, that everyone should go home. When Prohibition ended, the bar was owned by Frank Frosty Cuniff and later Dan Hernan. It was known as the Shamrock Bar, selling light lunches. Up until 1934, they had even had slot machines. Short after World War II, the city purchased the building and opened a municipal liquor store. Townspeople called it the Powerhouse and the Muni. In 1965, the Shamrock Bar moved into its new location across the street. The building was then home of the Red Rooster Inn, later the Village Inn. Both were well-patronized restaurants before the corner was raised in 1981. The last building was built in 1982. July 1868, to the east of the Keegan home, Frank Gallen opened the first general store. John C. Garrity became a partner in 1876 and in 1878 became the sole owner. April 9, 1881, fires destroyed the building. J.C. Garrity built the store 1 block west. Michael Corcoran had a blacksmith shop here, and to the east, Louis P. Warwick had an implement shop. Later, it was owned by Michael Corcoran. On the southwest corner of what is now 146th Street and Burma Avenue, The German Methodist Episcopal Church was built in the summer of 1874 at the cost of $1,900. This church served its parishioners until 1962, when the ground was broken for a new location, now called Rosemount United Church. The building was then purchased in 1965 by Lampert Lumber for storage. The building was raised in 1984 for condominiums. St. John's Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod was founded in 1911 in the township of Rosemount. The current building was constructed in 1977, and the original church was moved 1/2 mile east, now located on private property. World War II and the Gopher Ordnance Works brought many changes to Rosemount. The war changed how people lived and worked. Cars became a necessity, not a luxury. Now technology had changed the way we lived and worked. We lived in a world of change. The census in 1860 for the town of Rosemount was 295. In 1972, the township and village of Rosemount merged to form the city of Rosemount. Today, the city has over 22,000 residents. The town of Rosemount has come a long way. We will continue to remember our past, but we will always look to the future.